In this video, you'll learn the correct things to do as the roamer if your team is losing. I've struggled through countless of games where the enemy had the advantage, so I'll tell you what I've learned. Number 1, stick to the ally with the most gold or highest capability to turn the game around. This could be anyone, and only you can figure out who it is in your game. One way to do that is by checking the one with the highest farm, best KDA, or who you believe can deal the most damage and follow-up. Number 2, don't try to contest the Lord if you believe you can defend, or you have no chance of getting the Lord. For example, during the M5 knockout stage, where it was ONIC versus APBR in Game 1, notice how ONIC knew that it was too risky, where they were way too far behind in gold, and instead decided to not contest the Lord and just defend. The reason you shouldn't contest could either be because the enemy jungler has retribution and your jungler is dead, or you don't have any allies with you. But when it comes to how you should defend, I want you to try to not let the enemy minion waves enter the attack range of your base, as the enemies then can ignore you and push your base. Try to make the Lord or enemy minions follow you, so that you delay the enemies from pushing your base until your allies respawn if they're dead. Number 3, don't initiate on the enemy unless your team has enough damage. This is about your team's items, where you ask yourself whether they have enough farm to actually deal damage when they follow up your initiation. Even as a tank main, it's still a good idea to learn about the other roles items, so that you know when your allies reach their power spikes, which is when an item gives them a huge boost in damage. An item that gives a power spike in the late game are typically items with penetration, which is the Divine Glaive and the Malefic Roar. So if you feel like your allies don't deal enough damage, and the enemies are too tanky, it could be because your allies haven't gotten their penetration items yet to reduce the enemy's defense stats. Number 4, if you haven't gotten all of your tank items yet and you're still squishy, remember to be careful with your positioning, since the enemies have a lot of damage in the late game and can burst you down even if you're a tank. You should only be the front line for your team when necessary, meaning when you absolutely can and won't get bursted down in seconds. The reason you shouldn't all the time is because sometimes your allies can avoid the enemy's skills themselves and don't need you to shield them. Number 5, trade kills with the enemy whenever you can, but make sure your team is still able to defend the turrets and base. This means that you sacrifice yourself to get kills for your allies when your team is behind in gold, and it's clever because you actually gain more gold from killing an enemy compared to an enemy killing you or your allies. The idea is so that your team can get their items faster to have a higher chance of making a comeback. To make it less risky, because your allies will be alone while you're respawning, you should sacrifice yourself to take out the big problem of the enemy team. That way they will have less chance of ending your base. Number 6, if you're in a situation where you've lost all of your turrets, and you and your team want to contest the Lord, make sure you don't initiate a team fight while enemy minion waves are coming to your base, because then your teammates need to clear the waves to stop the enemy from getting a chance to backdoor your base. This means that you must pay attention to when minion waves are coming, even when you can't see them when you look at the map, by checking whenever your own minion waves spawn. So if you do predict a minion wave will come, your teammate will eventually notice it too when they're revealed on the map, so that's where you should let them clear first, before you engage. However, of course trying to steal the Lord and retreating immediately afterwards is different and okay, but a teamfight without your whole team is not a good idea. The only time you can initiate a team fight, despite there being minion waves on their way to your base, is when all the enemies are at Lord, unless they have a Ling or Fanny who can rotate fast. Number 7, target the enemy carrying their team. After all the games I've played, I've come to realize that there's usually only one enemy, that is the big problem, and once that enemy is dead, the rest of the enemy team collapses. Normally, that would be the enemy marksman in the late game, but it could as well be the tank or support of the enemy team, who's doing all the work by being the front line, initiating huge team fights, stunning your teammates and healing their allies. So if it is their tank who is the big problem, I suggest stunning him the moment the enemy tank is out of positioning and away from his teammates, but be sure your team will follow and attack. An example of a support who could be the biggest problem is Estus. If the enemy team heavily relies on his healing and you stun him and they attack, then they'll collapse easier. Find out who's the biggest problem and focus on that enemy, even if it's not enemy marksman, mage or jungler. You want to be able to spot and predict that enemy on the map. To help you with that, you should watch this guide about map awareness.